deep in the heart of Texas.
We're in the business of winning.
Don't bet against me.
I don't bet anyway.
Don't lose your life.
This one's a long time coming. Sorry I haven't been posting regularly. Last year, so I got a job that just takes up a lot of my time and whatnot. Anyways, here nor there, y'all don't care. Y'all want the content, so let's give it to you. So this one's a long time coming. I had started to do a video on this, back when, I'm sorry if I get his name wrong. I'm not doing it on purpose. Johnny, from Goat James Kingdom. And we had a little back and forth, I think in the comments on this one. He had kind of given his GOAT formula, right? And I told him I would make one as well. And of course it's been like a year or something. So finally making it. And of course, this is just my opinion on things. This is not meant to I'm not trying to dog anybody or whatever, right? Me always being the politician playing the middle. But I did want to do my own formula. I'm essentially just going to run LeBron and Michael through it. We'll do some other notables who will have a chance. I'm not going to run through the top 50, like they did. Props to them for doing that. But I'll probably do LeBron and Kareem, and we'll try to do Bill Russell the best we can. We'll throw Magic in there and some other ones. So I want to make that clear, right? And if you guys want to take my formula and then do whoever, right, that's fine. But let's as always, got to set the table. Let's talk about a formula or how formulas work in this instance, right? So for all the people who don't like just pure stats and formulas, right? I understand that this doesn't account per se for things like longevity per se, right? So someone like a Larry Bird, who many would consider to be in the top 10, probably in a formula isn't going to be in the top 10, right? You just didn't stick around and play long enough to maybe crack that top 10. So I want to make that clear, right? I understand that this formula is not the end all be all, right? It doesn't account for context and who you beat, who you didn't beat, what area you played in, the eye test, right? Just looking at someone versus someone else, right? It doesn't take into account a skill set or how clutch you are, right? So there's all these other things that it doesn't account for. So let's just do that, right? Now, I think the way I would go about making a formula, right? I'm going to get into some critiques of their formula. But if I was going to go to a formula, I would start by weighing it in terms of what accomplishments or awards are the most prestigious, and then maybe go from there and work down. Which ones are the harder to obtain, or which ones mean more, right? That is largely how I will start my formula, and I'll give you all a breakdown here shortly. But my critiques of their formula, this formula you see on screen, correct? They decided to look at how many times a particular award or category had been won, right? So as you can see, MVP. The most MVPs any player has ever won is 6. If we don't count someone like a Bill Russell, right? So he takes the 6 essentially, and it's essentially 6 divided by 10, right? Or I'm sorry, 10 divided by 6, right? You take the perfect score of 10, in their mind is how they're saying it. And then depending on how much that award was won by a particular player, that is then what they will go off of, correct? In my opinion, and this gets into the philosophy of the formula now, the big contention me and Goat James Kingdom had is I was trying to tell him that essentially any formula that you make has an element of subjective human input, right? There is no objective formula, and they think that this is objective because it is going off of objective facts that have happened in the NBA, right? The most MVP someone has won is 6. That is a fact. They then apply this standard to all NBA, all defense, etc., right? And so they say that is objective. My problem is that from the get-go, you have subjectively decided how to rank it. It's not objective, right? And as much as people want to say something is objective, there really is no objective reality that people can agree on except for basic math. 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? 1 banana plus 1 banana equals 2 bananas, correct? But here we're trying to decide, well, what does 1 equal, what does 2 equal, etc., in terms of these awards and how much they should be weighed, right? So just right off its face, right, I think you just have to admit that no matter what formula a human is going to spit out for this GOAT ranking we're trying to do in its formulaic, setting, is that it will immediately be subjective right off the bat. It just is. There's no way around it, correct? So we need to get that out of the way. This is not an objective formula they have made. Neither will mine be an objective formula. It is based on my subjective way of making the formula. And our argument is that we each think we're trying to be the most fair, the most even-handed, right? The most even-keeled in terms of the formulas that we make, right? We're trying to now contend who is getting closer to the truth in terms of their formula. But there is no objective truth in this scenario, right? So keep that in mind. You guys know me. I like to get like philosophical sometimes to break down how we're going about this, right? So let's look at their formula real quick. And this is to say, it's not that I do not understand their formula. I completely understand what they did. I understand their reasoning. The bottom line still, though, is that it's not objective, right? And so my big contention with this one is that the way that they say, well, what really matters is how many times someone had won something, right? And then, having that being, out of 10, correct? That is subjective. You decided to do that. I understand you think you're pulling from objective categories and stats and numbers, but it's still a subjective in the way you've pieced them together. And so right off its face, right? The fact that a Defensive Player of the Year award has been won less times by a singular player than the MVP, right? I think their thought process is that it makes it more coveted. It is harder to do, right? If the best defensive player could only win 4, then it must be a harder award to perhaps win than the MVP. That could be true. Again, how do we know that? I'm not sure. But what I will say is to think that, again, I understand where you're saying that a Defensive Player of the Year has been won less times by any singular player. It must be harder to do. Therefore, it is weighed more. That's where you lose me, right? To think that, in my opinion, right, I think 90 to 95% or more of just NBA fans, coaches, players, right, would take an MVP over a Defensive Player of the Year. I don't think this is controversial. I don't think that is anything anyone would really argue against, correct? Again, they have all defense worth more than an all NBA. Maybe if you're first, they have first teams here, okay? So it's first team. I don't think anyone would take an all NBA first team selection over a first team all defensive selection. I'm sure there is a particular defensive player or two in your mind that you could think of that maybe if I were to get him as an all defensive player on my team, he might be better than any particular first team all NBA that you could maybe cherry pick, right? So again, if I'm getting like an Akeem Olajuwon as a first team all defense, but he didn't make a first team all NBA or something like that, yes, I want Akeem, right? I will take Akeem in that scenario, right? More than likely versus the other guys who maybe had made that all NBA, right? But those are few and far between, and the only reason Hakeem would be preferred is because he also had a really good offensive game, right? And that brings me back to the MVP. The MVP is a heavily offensive award, yes, but it doesn't compensate both sides. Um, and so I want to lead with that, right? If you just look at this, does this feel right to you? Does this look right? Does this seem right? Right? If you were saying, hey, any given year you could have an MVP or the defensive player of the year, 9 times out of 10 people are going to take the MVP, right? With like a few exceptions here or there. And I think Olajuwon's like a good one to bring up, right? Perhaps maybe not the best offensive player, but definitely was one of the best defensive players, right? But he was still so good on offense that's why it makes up for it, right? If Olajuwon was only his defense, and let's say he was quite literally like a Rudy Gobert on offense, I don't think anyone would be taking Akeem over any given MVP in a year in that scenario, right? So does this look right to people? I would say no. My first instinct is to say this isn't right, this isn't accurate. Whatever you guys have done, which again I understand what you've done, I don't think you went about doing it right. So I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to leave that there. If people like the way they did their formula, I don't care. You know, it's your opinion. This just doesn't look right. This doesn't feel right. Do you understand? An MVP is worth less than a defensive player of the year. You're saying the most important award, according to this chart right here, right? 0.5 points for stat titles. You're telling me that this formula here says that defensive player of the year awards are worth more than anything else in the league, right? I'm not even sure if a defensive player of the year is worth more than a first team All NBA, depending, right? First team All NBA is essentially kind of saying you're one of the best 5 players, right, in the league. And it always includes an MVP just about in one of those 5. That's where we will start off, right? So what is my formula? So before I get into my formula, I want to make it very clear I have not run Jordan and LeBron through the formula yet. LeBron could win. Who knows, right? And again, this is why I say the formula is not the end all be all, right? Like even if LeBron were to come out on top or Bill Russell's over Jordan or whatever, like still doesn't really change anything in my opinion. Like don't let this sway you into changing your mind, right? This is just another tool in the toolbox, right? Or another reference point is really all it is, right? So here's largely what I did. You guys can see that, yeah. So to make it as even a comparison as possible, I just kept the same categories as they did. Maybe just altered a few things here or there. So what I did, and again, this is my subjective formula, right? This is not me claiming that this is the foolproof GOAT ranking that everyone needs to follow, right? What I started off with is I said, I think the most coveted awards or prestigious awards will be ranked with a 5. That'll be the heaviest. And then we'll work our way down to a 1 for things that I think are not as prestigious or as hard to accomplish. So for me, right, being an MVP of the league is essentially the single best award a player can receive, I think. There I think is an argument to be made, like if you are the best player on a team and you win a ring and a finals MVP, okay, like I would say that could be seen as equal or more coveted, right? So if you were, I'm just gonna say, if you were a contributor, a main contributor on a championship team, I'm gonna give you 5 points. If you're an MVP, I'm gonna give you 5 points. That's where I started at, right? I started with what I thought were the two. You know, if you were gonna ask people, you can only get 2 trophies. I think most people would say an MVP and a championship trophy, right? Now, some people really covet the finals MVP. I don't per se. I think that it's like a cherry on top. So like when Jordan takes his team and he wins them 6 rings and he gets 6 finals MVPs, right? It's sort of redundant in my opinion, right? You're kind of being redundant with Jordan was the best player that on his team and took him to rings. I just think that him winning that ring sort of already encompasses everything that the finals MVP is about. Now I went ahead and I threw 1 extra point on for a finals MVP because again, that means you stepped up on the biggest stage. You know, you were the best player theoretically on the best team. I guess is maybe how you could say it, which is, you know, an accomplishment But I'm just going to give it 1 because I think, again, like I said, I don't want to beat a dead horse. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but I think it is redundant, right? If I were to give the Finals MVP 5 points and I gave Jordan or LeBron 5 points for also being the best player that took their team to a ring, I just feel it's redundant. Like you're just kind of doubling down on the same accomplishment per se, right? So I just threw an extra 1 on top for a Finals MVP. I think there needs to be some distinction. You need to get something for it, right? It's not a nothing. But again, taking your team and giving you 5 points for the ring, I've kind of already given you credit for that accomplishment, if that makes sense, right? MVPs, I'm gonna just have 5 for first. Again, all NBAs. If you are first team All NBA, that is after those first 2, I think is very close. It's neck and neck, right? To be a first team All NBA but not win the MVP is kind of like saying, like you were essentially next in line, right? Like it is, you're taking the best 5 players in the league. Now, there can be some argument. I think they've kind of moved away from positions as of late. So, yes, I guess you could go back and try to cherry pick things about maybe this guy should have been first instead of second, etc. But I'm just going to go with what's on the books, right? So to go from 5 and then second is third team is 1 point. That feels right. Again, I think that's fair. I think that's right. All defense, again, being one of the best 5 players on one side of the floor. Again, I think is it's a 2-sided game, right? There's 2 parts of the game. I still, just as I said earlier, I don't think an all defensive first team is worth the same as an all NBA first team. But it is a prestigious award in my opinion, right? There are 2 sides of the game, and to say you are the best at one or the other, or one of the best, I think should be commended, right? And so I just did a nice, right? There's first, second, third all NBA. There's a first and second all defense, right? And I think it just felt right that if first team All NBA is 5, first team All NBA defense is 4, second team All NBA is 3, second team All NBA defense is 2, and then third team All NBA is 1. I think that's fair. I think that objectively, at least logically, tracks. I think people could understand that. I think that seems fair in the ranking and the weight of how that works. If you were in the top 3 of a major category, again, because with some guys we don't have analytics, so here in a second I'm going to decide what to do with that. Maybe with Jordan and LeBron, we can go ahead and say if you were just top 3 in a statistical category, or at least a major analytical category, I'm going to see that should make sense. I don't see any problem with that per se. I would like to stick more to just the main statistical categories. Analytics can get a little team-based at times, if that makes sense. There's a little bit more that goes into analytics than just pure stats, right? So if you essentially got in the top 3, I think I'm just going to give you 1, right? And the reason for this is, again, to make my case, Kobe scores 29 points per game, and Tracy McGrady scores 28.5 points per game. Let's say they shoot relatively the same percentage, right? Is like that half point that Kobe got, is it really worth so much that he should get a point and McGrady shouldn't, right? I don't think that a half point difference in a statistical category is enough to reward someone at the top, but not the second or third, who maybe literally most of the time are within 1 point of the top guy, right? So I thought if you're top 3 in any statistical category, I'm just going to give you a point, right? I thought about possibly, again, this comes back to what are things worth, right? I was thinking about maybe doing, okay, if you're first, you get 3. If you're second in a category, you get 2. And if you're third in a category, you get 1, right? But again, I thinking about it, right? Just because you are the leader in points or rebounds or assists, I don't think it's quite saying the same as, again, if we're going to say a second All-NBA is 3 points as well, which would have been the same as if you led a statistical category. I just don't think they're on the same. I just don't think it's the same weight that because you led the league in blocks or rebounds per se, that makes you a top 10 player in theory, right? Second team All NBA, the top 5, and then the second top 5. I just don't see that being weighted the same, correct? I just don't think being the best in one statistical category is the same as someone who's considered a top 10 player, if that makes sense. And so that's why I did top 3, right? So if you were just dominant in a category, I'll give you a point. I think that's fair. And again, just because you score the most points, that doesn't mean you're going to win a championship. That doesn't really translate per se to a GOAT ranking success, right? And by the way, this one really helps LeBron here because Jordan has obviously led the league, I think, 11 times for any of the major categories, and LeBron's only led twice, right? LeBron has a lot of top 3 finishes, though, so this could come to bite me in the ass a little bit if I'm trying to make an argument for Jordan, but that's just what I left. It's what felt right, you know? And again, this is where people need to have a little context about longevity, right? Like, for every year that LeBron keeps playing past what Jordan did, he's going to be getting exponentially more awards, if you will, right? If he's top 3 in like 3 categories, you know, that starts to compile real quick. So we'll see what that looks like. Defensive player of the year, again, kind of with the whole All NBA first team and the All NBA second team. I mean, the All NBA first team defense. Again, I think most people would say it is more vital that I am able to get a bucket or run an offense versus a guy who's a clamps on defense, right? And that's not to poo-poo defense or, you know, say the offense is everything, but just objectively speaking, right? A guy who's a walking bucket, I think, is more coveted and is much rarer and is harder to do in the NBA than a guy who can just lock someone down one-on-one or a really good rebounder, right? And this is the part about the defensive player of the year that's kind of always irked me a little bit. It's not really a big deal, but the Defensive Player of the Year award is a heavily biased big man award, right? It essentially focuses on rebounds and blocks largely, right? That's kind of how they decide it. Ever since, you know, Peyton and Jordan, essentially, it's been all power forwards. I think there's maybe been a few small forwards. It's been all power forwards and centers, right? So, you know, I think it's a little bit, again, is the defense. I think the Defensive Player of the Year is a little biased to big men, to put it shortly, right? And so is it as coveted as just simply being called the best player in the league for that year? It's obviously not that, but it is obviously like a good award. It's a big award, right? And so I think having it one less than an MVP, I think makes sense. I think that's fair. I thought about maybe making it a 3, but I just went ahead and left it at a 4 because it is a big award. And then for All-Star, I gave 2. Again, All-NBA is voted on by your peers and the media, etc. And the All-Star is voted on by the fans, and it's largely a popularity contest, right? That's not to say the fans don't know what they're saying or doing, but obviously there's a lot of bias in fans, correct? And you have global voting, you know, all kinds of stuff, right? So is making an All-Star team, right? Think about Dirk. Think about Dirk or Dwayne Wade. Maybe Dwayne Wade was still worthy. I can't quite remember how good he was in that last All-Star game he had with Dirk. But essentially those two guys were probably not on paper or in terms of what they had done that year were probably not worthy of an All-Star game nod, right? But they got in. It was their, you know, their retirement tour, you know, and the league essentially gave an ode to those guys about how good they've been and what they've done for the game, right? So again, the All-Star is a little bit of a biased award. Again, it's not nothing, right? It means something. But again, is an All-Star worth being second team All-NBA, kind of more, you know, as objective as it can be to be voted on by your peers in the media, etc. I just think the second team All-NBA, you know, the top 10 guys voted on in the NBA versus the top 24 guys voted on by the fans, right? So that's my logic with that one. And this essentially covers everything that they did. I'm not really sure what else we possibly could add in here. I mean, you could make a formula. Again, here comes with the subjective logic, right? You can put in and out and input this and input that and variable this and variable that and weigh this and weigh that. It's all subjective in terms of how you want to do it and what you want to put in, right? So this is what I'm going with. I think it makes sense. I think it logically is pretty solid. You know, of course, you could make some arguments here and there for certain things, right? But again, keeping it on a scale of 1 to 5, I think reduces the range of error that I could put on two categories that maybe people don't agree how I weighed them, right. So the 1 to 5, I think, keeps the margin of error a little smaller, if that makes sense. And I also did a video, I believe I did a video critiquing Goat James Kingdom, but then also comparing and contrasting with Jimmy High Roller. If you guys want to go watch that, it's a good illustration of how, you know, two channels saying I have the GOAT formula, and they have two totally different answers, right? Or two totally different rankings on how they did it, right? So this is not me saying I'm no better than you or that I'm smarter than you or anything like that. Just putting it all out, all my cards out on the table so you guys can see what I'm thinking, right? So I was going back and forth. I think I'm going to make an all-star game 1 point. I was thinking about the Dirk scenario and how essentially if you're an all-star, you're, let's just call it like a top 25 player, correct? If there's 12 on each side, depending on substitutions and stuff, you know, guys will be injured, they'll sub someone in or replace them. And then the fact that it's voted on, it is a bit of a popularity contest. And if you think about the fact that if we take all of the All-NBAs, so the 10 guys from defense and the 15 guys from offense, or just the All-NBAs, that's 25 players. So it's essentially the same. And, you know, objectively speaking, the All-Star game itself is a little meaningless. And obviously it's turned into such a shit show as of late. And, you know, I just thought I'd give it 1. I thought 2 was just too much. To say that getting the nod of an all-star player is better than a third team All-NBA, you know, just below a second team, or is the same as being a top 10 defender. I just didn't think that felt right. So I'm just going to give an all-star 1 point. Again, it means something, you know, the fans aren't, you know, just totally dumb. They watch the games, but it can be a little bit of like an acknowledgement or like an ode to someone if they've played a long time. Do guys take it seriously? Like, you know, do I need to break it down by All-Star Game MVPs or who was really good, right? So I thought All-Star Game at 1 made sense. They're kind of being handed out like candy in comparison to an All-NBA or something, right? In a way, I don't mean to like poo-poo the All-Star Game. That's not my intent, but I just felt better doing 1 point. That's just all I'm gonna say, or I'm gonna leave it. I just think an All-Star game. It's again, it's like the Finals MVP to me. It's like a cherry on top. It's a nice acknowledgement, but getting the All NBAs or being a statistical leader in something, right? I think that matters just as much or more than an All-Star game. So that's what I'm gonna say about that. I'm just gonna leave it at that. So I wanted to make one amendment before we got into it and started putting all the numbers together. All right, so I went ahead and just did LeBron and Jordan for now. I will do the others here in a second at the end of the video, but obviously people are probably here just for these two. And Jordan squeaks them out, right? Like, it's not a big win. It doesn't really mean much to me per se, right? But yeah, that's just is what it is. It's a slight victory. Essentially, where Jordan wins, I think, it's in the all defense and in the 2 extra championships and the 1 more MVP, right? That's the difference you're seeing. Again, had I kept the All-Star game thing the way it was, LeBron would have won, you know? So it's just very subjective as usual, you know? It's a tight race, obviously. But that's just what I got, right? So, you know, take it for what it's worth. I'll go ahead and run out the other ones real quick, and we can just see where they end up. All right, so real quick, I just ran through a few guys. I did MJ, LeBron, Bill, Kareem, Magic, Wilt, and Tim Duncan. Just some guys who I thought maybe would get some high scores here. Kareem ended up coming out on top with 200. As you can see here, move this over just a little bit. Yeah, so Kareem Abdul-Jabbar came out on top with 200. Then of course we have MJ, LeBron, Tim Duncan had a decent score. Again, with Wilt and Bill, I know like if we were to go back and try to retroactively give them some awards and statistical categories that weren't around during their time, they'd probably come out on top, I'm well aware, but just want to do the formula real quick. That's what it is. That's the ranking. That's what I came up with. MJ's not number one. It's okay. Doesn't mean much to me, but just wanted to get this out of the way. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Tell me what you think. Or am I wrong? What do you like? Maybe we could do something else, but just give me your thoughts. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you on the next one.